All right, we are going to talk about viruses. So viruses are another thing that can get you sick. So we're first going to talk about the size of a virus. So here is a bacteria cell. Look how huge it is. And actually, this right here up in the corner, this is a human red blood cell, and that's just a little tiny piece of it. So look how much bigger a red blood cell is than a bacteria, and then look how much bigger both of them are than each of these little tiny viruses. So these are all just random viruses that you may or may not have heard of. You get the rabies virus. This is what we inoculate our dogs and cats against, rabies. Ebola, so the thing that makes everyone sick. The Tabasco mosaic virus. Different bacteriophages, the polio virus, chlamydia, lots of different types of viruses, and look at how small they are by comparison. So this bacteriophage, okay, any bacteriophage infects bacteria, so this bacteriophage could come up and just sit right on top of a bacteria cell, or this E. coli. And then any of these can easily fit within a red blood cell. All right, viruses, these are particles that are made of protein coats, meaning they have protein on the outside, and then nucleic acids, either DNA or RNA, as instructions, and then sometimes lipids or fats. They can only reproduce inside of living cells. So that means they can only reproduce either once they are inside a cell or they use the actual cell to reproduce themselves. And viruses, as you saw on the last slide, come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Look at all of these different shapes, and these are all viruses. Lots of different types. These are common viruses. So a typical virus has a core of either DNA or RNA. So this area right here is either DNA. Remember how that was the instructions? Or RNA. That is another method. That's another little booklet of instructions for the cell. And that can be found here or here in both of these different types. This is a bacteriophage, and this actually is influenza. This is what the flu looks like. So when you get the flu, it's a lot of these little tiny viruses that look like this. And they are made of a envelope. Okay, so you have this protein coat. You have the DNA or RNA on the inside. They have some sort of tail that helps them move, and then these are fibers that actually helps them land on top of the bacteria, because bacteriophages only infect bacteria. They land on top of the bacteria and they insert their DNA through this tail into the actual cell. So these are the two big things they're made out of. It's a protein outside and their DNA or RNA on the inside. Just a reminder, DNA and RNA is the molecules that store information for the cell. Essentially, if you're using an analogy, they're like instructions or a recipe for baking a cake. They're like instructions in a cookbook for baking a cake. They tell the cell how to do everything. All right, so there are two types of viral infections, because viruses, an infection is when there's a lot of a certain type of bacteria or virus or prokaryote or protozoa or fungi in one specific area. So viral infections can either be lytic or lysogenic. If there is a lytic infection, the virus enters the cell, so it actually physically enters the cell, and it makes copies of itself, which cause the cell to burst, meaning the cell will pop because it's dying. And that releases hundreds of new viruses into the environment. So literally, the virus pops into the cell, okay? It pops in, it uses the cell, it makes lots of copies of itself, and then when it has lots of copies of the virus, then it causes the cell to burst, and all those viruses go floating around and go to infect other cells. You also have lysogenic infections. This is when the virus actually becomes a part of the DNA of the cell. And this is when the host actually will make the copies of the DNA for the virus. And then when that cell eventually dies, it's going to, or replicates, excuse me, it's going to make more copies of itself, thus spreading the virus's genes. Okay, this is important viral vocabulary. The host, that is the cell that a virus infects. A host can be us as humans. It can be plants can be hosts. It can be bacteria. Bacteria can host viruses. It can be lots of things. It's whatever is carrying the infection. Bacteriophages are viruses that only infect bacteria. So for a virus, the bacteria is the host. It's the thing they infect. You have prophage. This is viral DNA that is actually incorporated into the host during lysogenic infection. So the actual DNA, the virus's DNA, the instructions for how to make the virus that get put into the host's DNA during a lysogenic infection is called a prophage. And then you have retroviruses. This one's a little confusing, and I'm not going to have you worry about it too much, but retroviruses are essentially viruses that have RNA, and they make DNA out of their RNA so that the cell can make RNA out of that DNA. You don't need to worry about it right now. You'll learn about it more in high school biology. Okay, so let's compare viruses versus cells. So remember all of our characteristics of life. I have put a couple in here that we didn't talk about that they're not characteristics of life necessarily, but they are very important information to compare between viruses and cells. So the cell's structure. So basically in a virus, it's just DNA and RNA and the protein capsule or capsid. In cells, we have cell membranes, cytoplasms, and all the organelles in eukaryotes. Reproduction. Remember, all living things must reproduce. And viruses can only reproduce if they're in a host cell. Cells can reproduce whenever they want. And that includes bacteria. Remember, bacteria are cells. So if you watched last night's video, you'll know that bacteria can reproduce in lots of different ways, in 3 different ways to be exact. And so they are a cell, and they can control when they replicate. Excuse me. Genetic code. So basically, viruses use DNA as their genetic code or RNA as their genetic code. Cells only use DNA as their genetic code. Viruses, do they grow and develop? No. Do cells grow and develop? Yes. They obtain and use energy. Do viruses get energy and use it? No. Okay, they get all their nutrients that they need from the cells that they infect. Do cells obtain and use energy? Yes. They respond to the environment. Do viruses respond to the environment? No. Do cells respond to the environment? Absolutely. Adaptation. Do cells adapt to or do viruses adapt to the environment around them? The answer is actually yes. They change so that they can survive in whatever environment they are in. And cells do the same thing, so they both adapt to their environment. And then homeostasis, are they able to stay in balance with the environment that they're in? And viruses cannot do that, but cells can. Notice that all these say yes, and remember, to be considered living, you have to be able to do all the characteristics of life. So here's our virus. You tell me, are viruses living? Are viruses living in your opinion? Why or why not? I want you to write 3 paragraphs at the bottom of your notes that explain your thinking. Thank you.